So hi everybody, welcome. I'm Dan Reus I'm managing editor at large for EQ. And we're here today as part of Startup Week. We're talking with a fantastic group of people actively involved in the ag startup space, agriculture, food and agriculture here in the St. Louis area. And if you're listening in while we're live, please, there's a Q&A box so you can post your questions to tee up to the folks on the panel who are going to introduce themselves at the roundtable, who are going to introduce themselves here in just a moment. And if you're listening to this recording afterwards, we encourage you to take a look on EQ to see more about this area. But let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to start with Sharon. Sharon, you're with Sabre Consulting, but you've had a role with big companies, with startups as a CEO and advising and actually kind of bringing together the ecosystem with the Ag Innovation Showcase and some of the other stuff. Can you talk a little bit about, we'll get into kind of what you're doing, but just introduce yourself and how you got here.
Okay, well, I'm Sharon Berberich, and I actually am working for myself now as a consultant, and I do consider myself a local entrepreneur. I started my career at Monsanto, and when I left Monsanto, I joined the startup community in St. Louis back in 2003. That was when it was just beginning. So I've seen this ecosystem grow over the past 20 years, just about. So I also spent some time at Dow AgriSciences, and the balance of my career has all been in startups. And most recently, I just recently left Plastomics. It was a plant biotechnology company. Plant biotechnology is one of my passions. So you'll hear me talk a little bit more about that. So I'm going to keep my intro brief and pass it on to the next person.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sharon. Tyrean, welcome. Good to see you. And why don't you tell us a little about yourself and what you're doing?
Yeah, well, my name is Tyrean Lewis, and I'm the owner and founder of Heru Urban Farming. What we do is we provide sustainable, healthy food choices for food apartheid communities. So basically what I mean by food apartheid, I know we heard of food deserts. That's when it's naturally done, in my opinion, but food apartheid has been done deliberately. I believe they deliberately set us up in situations in our communities where we don't have the proper stuff that we need. And that's where I come into play at. And yeah.
Wonderful. So food is, is definitely a social thing as well as it is as much as an economic and environmental thing. So Fardis, next, you're next, and you've got an interesting background. You've gone from fairly well recognized mechanical engineering background to doing something in ag tech. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing with calving technologies and how you got here?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Fardis. I haven't gone from mechanical engineer to ag tech. I'm still doing mechanical engineering, but now it's related to ag tech. So that's how I want to explain it. I have a PhD mechanical engineer from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and from 2014. And since then, I've been doing product development for different businesses, specifically for refrigeration businesses and biosampling. And I don't want to get into that much, but I have a lot of experience with commercialization, product development, research, and the research that goes through it. And the way I got into calving tech is I knew Libby Martin, which is a founder and CEO of the startup, from a friend of friend, and I started being remotely consulting as a friend about the product development, how they do the research to gather data and everything. And then slowly I get more involved, and I got interested about the challenges. And now I'm a CTO and co-founder of the calving tech.
That's great. And we're going to talk a little bit more about calving technologies in a minute and what you guys are doing. Definitely. I think it's really interesting. Stephanie joins us from the Donald Danforth Plant Science Center. Stephanie works with a lot of the investigators at the Danforth, and really at the how do you get things out of research and partnerships with people in the world. But Stephanie, talk a little bit about what you do.
Good morning, everyone. Yes, I'm actually coming to you from my house in Kirkwood. I wish I was in the beautiful Donald Danforth Plant Science Center this morning. Thank you so much for having me. So yes, I'm Stephanie Regagnon. I've worked in agriculture for about 20 years in everything from trade associations to Fortune 500 multinationals. I've been a longtime volunteer at the Danforth Plant Science Center, but I've only recently joined them full-time in employment, and I'm in the innovation space. And what that means for us is, how do we bring our science forward into the market? How do we bring it into the hands of farmers? We have so many wonderful and relevant scientific projects happening on any given day, right? Literally about 100 funded projects on some level. How do we actually get the science into the marketplace so that it can make a real impact in the hands of farmers? So that's what my team is focused on doing. We do that in a variety of different ways, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that as the discussion plays out here. So thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thanks, Stephanie. And finally, and only by nature of alphabetically, finally, we have Charlie, and Charlie joins us. He's with Pluton Bio, and Charlie has an interesting journey from another entrepreneurial space to this one, and is doing some pretty exciting things as they look at, well, I'll let Charlie tell about it.
Sure. Thank you. I'm the CEO of Pluton Bio, and Pluton is really about mining the power of microbes. That's bacteria, fungi, and viruses, live everywhere in everything, and mining the power of microbes to discover a sustainable tomorrow today. We're in the product discovery and product discovery business. Our initial group of products really focuses around replacing synthetic chemicals with microbial derived natural products. We've got a mosquito larvicide that we're currently formulating and some other very exciting things in the tap.
Thanks, Charlie. So just a reminder, if you have questions, anybody that's attending, please put those in and we'll work those into the conversation, but we intend this to be kind of a free-flowing conversation. So I'm going to start, Sharon, if you could talk a little bit about, I think you have, because of some of your past work, you've seen how, even though food and ag, are everywhere, St. Louis is kind of this node on that space. And so we have periodically, a lot of attention is paid here to St. Louis. I was wondering if you could, and in this region, I was wondering if you could kind of paint a picture of how big the opportunity is for startups and innovators in food, and also kind of why it's relevant to be listening to this group of people that are predominantly from St. Louis.
Well, I think there's a lot of opportunity in the agricultural space. And I say this a lot when I talk about the opportunities. The ag community seems to draft on what the pharmaceutical community is doing. And it's a biotech industry, just like pharma is sort of focusing on biotech. And it seems like agriculture is the stepchild. A lot of the money and a lot of the technology that is focused in pharmaceuticals is now actually being focused on agriculture. And I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the big challenges and the problems that agricultural startups need to face right now. And, we all know that one of the biggest challenges, we need more food. We need more nutritious food. That's obvious. But what we're really focusing on now is that precision agriculture and really trying to be more sustainable. And there's a need for less land use, less soil degradation, less chemistry, like Charlie said, less water use, less carbon emissions, less labor. And so I think those are some of the opportunities that St. Louis startups and startups across the globe are going to be facing. And, they're going to do this with artificial intelligence, with data analytics, with robotics, with sensors and imagery and software and biologics, like Charlie said. So I think those are some of the big opportunities. And you know what? We have companies right here in St. Louis that are solving some of those big problems. And those companies haven't just organically been grown in St. Louis. They have come to St. Louis. We have so many things here that attract agricultural startups to the region. And, that ecosystem that we've built is attracting people, attracting through the Danforth Plant Sciences Center, attracting through organizations like Biogenerator, that's an economic development entity. And also, big companies like Bayer and Purina and Amarin even are attracting startup companies to our region. So I'm not sure I exactly addressed your question, but I've seen the growth in this region, and it's phenomenal what St. Louis has built. And it challenges some of the other ecosystems like RTP in North Carolina.
Yeah,
In
if
fact,
I could jump in.
So I'll stop there and let other people make some
Charlie.
comments.
Yeah, if I could jump in, we started Pluton in 2017. We do have some Monsanto alumni amongst our core science team. But right now, Stephanie over Danforth with the Wells Fargo is providing us with some very sophisticated chemical analysis to be able to identify these novel microbes we found. So our proof of concept was to make a pesticide, and we chose mosquitoes, even though it's not an ag, because everybody knows it. It's easy to understand. Mosquitoes deadly. But Danforth, for instance, right now is using some of their very sophisticated biochemistry tools, and Dr. Tony Kuchin's lab is helping us identify why the microbes are able to kill the mosquito larvae. And we just, it's been a tremendous collaboration. And we're in the heartland, and as far as sustainability goes, it's in all of the above. Every one of us on this call have a different role to play, but it'll take creativity throughout the sector and throughout the entire supply chain, both from the product development, the land use, all the way down to how we get food to the consumers.
That's great, Charlie. I want to, Tyrean, Sharon introduced it something, and I wanted to go to you for a second. So you talked a lot about also justice, like like what you talked about, the difference between a food desert and food apartheid, that some of the access, Sharon really brought up a lot of trends that are really important, and those are for everybody, but that hasn't always been equitable. But you are much more small scale, and I don't think you ever intend to be a huge company, but talk a little bit about how, even in your experience, how this is really a share, like the things that people are talking about here, what are in common and what are things that are different as from a grower trying to address inequity as part of running a business.
Yeah, so I did write down some notes for Sharon as well. And I like what she touched on about challenges and less. So where I'm coming from as a farmer, most of our produce in Missouri come from over 12,000 miles away. Less than 1% of the food grown in this state stays in this state. So when I think this is a great time for small farmers, local food, local produce. This is a good time, especially with the crisis, everything going on. Everybody's is on being more constantly aware of their health and what they're eating. So I just think probably need to scale down. It's time for the small farmers to step up, because we'll provide that food for the local consumer. And when she talked about opportunities is out there, I have seen a lot recent years. So that is true. The point is, how do we access those resources? Like, who is presenting them to us? Like, I'm just fortunate enough to have access to the resources just because I'm out there publicly, so I know where it's at. But I just think that we had just more access to be aware, like who have the funds and who's getting these funds. And yeah, I hope I answered that question.
No, Tyrean, I'd like to build on something you said. I think, a lot of the trends for businesses like yours have actually been driven by consumer preference. That's another big area where people are innovating. People want fresh, they want local, they want things that have flavor. Breeding has taken out a lot of flavor, like, for instance, tomatoes sometimes don't even taste like tomatoes. they want plant-based protein, they want reduction of waste in the food stream. So I think, you know, you're innovating in a space where I see a lot of other startups also innovating, you know, here in St. Louis and globally, actually. So,
You know, it's really
good point.
interesting. You know, had a conversation with some other people earlier that we were talking about that there was a hype about vertical farming and this idea of bringing all of the growing really close to people. And, you know, all of these trends are combining in those kinds of areas as well to be really smart about how resources are used and everything. You know, maybe a market that does really well at pioneering vertical farming is going to be one that has all of these technical resources with all of the growers rather than being a big urban place where the growers are farther away. So maybe grower partnerships are a way that we can do this. So that might be interesting. But I want to go to Fardis now. Fardis, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name.
No, that's correct.
So you're with Calving Technologies. You're working with Libby and Paula. And you guys are working on something in animal health that really came from Libby's insight of living on a farm and seeing problems with cattle. And can you talk a little bit about what Calving Technologies is doing? Because it's, you know, wearables for cows is at first sounds like an incredibly niche thing, but it actually is probably more economically valuable than wearables for people at this point.
It's a good point. So I'm gonna start a little from before Libby started the company and how the concept came to her. So as you mentioned, Libby Martin, she grew up in a very small farming family. Her grandpa had cows, and then she realized growing up that one of the problems that they have is when they have a cow that is a pregnant cow, they need to keep an eye on it at all times, especially when it gets closer to the calving time. And that's a big problem because, for example, her brother needed to go every day, check on a specific cow every day. And then some of this, you have the ranch, sometimes you don't know exactly where your cow is. Some of the farmers, pasture is, let's say, 60 miles away from their house or what they're doing, what they're established. So, and then she was thinking how she can basically help them, as you mentioned, Sharon, basically getting more with doing less. And she did some research. She realized about 10% of calves, we have a 10% loss in the United States of calving. And this has a different reason. For example, the calf can freeze if there is a bad weather coming and the farmer is not taking care of it. There's vultures they're attacking the calf eyes. The first year cows, they usually have calving problems. So she realized if she can come up with this wearable or some way to alert a farmer at least 5 hours before the calving that this cow shows signs of calving, that can solve a lot of problems for the farmers. They can prepare. They can go find the cow, make sure they have all the resources available, and prevent the loss, basically. And she did some research on that, and basically when the cow gets closer to calving, it's uncomfortable for them. So they show a different behavior as a time when they are not calving. For example, they move away from the herd. This is something that we see in wild animals too, because they want to protect the calf from predators. So they move away to the isolated area, woody area in the ranch. You see they stop eating. They go circle around. They sit down. They stand up. They're uncomfortable. So what we are trying to do is to monitor a cow behavior as we get closer to the calving and detect this change of behavior and alert the farm. So that's basically in a nutshell. We're trying to predict calving. But there are a lot of challenges coming up. what movement we can measure, or what change of the behavior. There's some research in that, but what we are trying to do is to come up with an algorithm that if we input the cow's behavior, it tells you if the signs you're seeing is calving signs or no, just the normal signs of the behavior.
Yeah, I want to interrupt there for just a second, because you're talking about a lot of things I think are really powerful. So I just want to point out, that lost calves are a 10%, so if 10% of all calves that are conceived are lost, that's a huge economic impact. I mean, not to mention an ethical problem. I mean, that's, whether
that is true.
But I think it's really interesting that, so Libby came from this background on this farm and observed it. She couldn't join us today because she's, in addition to starting a company commercializing this product, she's a full-time veterinary student. She wants to stay involved in animal health. So she's a little busy. And I think that gives us a great opportunity to talk to Stephanie with the Danforth here about what are PIs, researchers or people that are doing other things, like how do they in ag tech, they don't have, enormous resources, but they're starting with day jobs or side hustles and things like that. How do they start, and how does that grow into something that can be commercialized? Would you share a little bit about that?
Sure. So, here's the thing. These kinds of things have been happening forever, and they can happen very naturally, right? A scientist runs into some kind of founder or investor at a conference, and voila, a startup is formed and everybody goes about their merry way. It has happened in St. Louis. It has happened around the globe for years. And it's a beautiful thing when that happens, right? What we're trying to do at the Danforth Center, and particularly here recently as we formed a new team to really focus on this, is how do we inspire a culture of entrepreneurship? How do we get our scientists to be thinking earlier about the possibility for commercialization? And part of that is, one, making sure that they're thinking about that in game first and early, right? The farmer, is this marketable? Is this viable? Is this useful? The other way is really mentoring these scientists and or connecting them with outside sources, whether that be funding, whether that be partners. So, not every scientist is an entrepreneur. Not every scientist is meant to be the CEO of a startup company. So how do we connect them with the right kinds of resources that includes people and talent to kind of bring the science to life? So again, it can happen organically. These magical meetings, I hear about them. There's a couple of them that have resulted in companies that are out back of the Danforth Center right now. But what we want to do is we want to be more intentional. We want to create more of these kinds of companies, more of these kinds of interactions, therefore more job growth and opportunity in St. Louis broadly.
And these can become tremendously of scale. I mean, we just heard one of the companies that you guys have really done a lot of support of over the years, Benson Hill, just raised $150 million round. They are clearly succeeding. So these aren't companies that have to stay small as well. Can you talk about them as an example?
Sure. So, it's so interesting. Benson Hill, for those of us in St. Louis, we've been watching this evolution for a while, and to see them now physically in a very large, beautiful building is just pretty darn impressive. What I get excited about is in a tour I was doing of our facility a few weeks ago, I saw the closet where Benson Hill started. And when I say closet, I'm not exaggerating. It is not a big fancy lab. It is a closet that one of the Danforth scientists and some partners that he ended up meeting would meet in this very tiny closet and go over the data and talk about what it meant. And then literally from that little closet, you can walk out into a hallway, and out the windows out the back of the building, you can see the Benson Hill building right now. It's pretty darn inspiring. Benson Hill is really, their goal is to kind of revolutionize agriculture, everything from grower to the plate, really try to change the conversation around food, the access and nutritional value around food. So they started out, as an idea inside of the Danforth Center, and they chose very deliberately to make their headquarters here in St. Louis. Their founder is actually not from here, but because of the resources, the access to core facilities, and all of these other kind of pieces that come together, they very intentionally chose St. Louis to stay here. So, yep, they're creeping up on 300 employees. They did just receive another very large round of funding, and certainly we're very proud of them, as we are many, many others.
Well, so Benson Hill, for those that aren't familiar, is they are a huge player in trait and data for plants to enable the development of traits and all of those kinds of things. But now we're going to go to Charlie, and Charlie, you guys have it. When you and I talked, your formation story doesn't involve a closet, but it involves sitting at ball games and at backyard barbecues, and gradually having this idea emerge. So talk a little bit about how Pluton emerged from those relationships.
Yeah. Scientists, so to do a tech startup, you need to have technical expertise. People with technical expertise, frankly, they're not trained to take entrepreneurial risks. So you do need to find the business person who will, what an entrepreneur truly does for a business is help set the vision, and then bring energy to the team and keep everybody focused on the vision. At its most elementary level, an entrepreneur takes something and creates something out of nothing. In the case of a business, brings an idea into reality. So Dr. Barry Goldman, we met him when my wife, Diana, finished her PhD way back in 1994. Barry was the scientist who came in and took over her project, which involved cell signaling across membranes. But anyway, and Barry and I became really good friends. He was a Monsanto guy. And, at some point it came down to Barry saying, I have an idea. I knew my transportation business, which I'd spent my entire career building, and I did start it out of my parents' basement. And when I sold it, we were delivering tens of thousands of packages a day throughout the Midwest. I knew I was going to be selling it. So I said, well, Barry, I'll help you start this business because this is a good time for me to do a career change. And so that's really where it started. I knew nothing about biotech when I started it, but I'd been around biologists, and I knew that I had real talent in Dr. Goldman, and I knew that he has experience bringing in talented scientists. So we gave it a whirl, and 3 years later, we're still at it, and we're up to 15 people now. So
that's awesome. Well, and talk a little bit about, we just kind of really briefly touched on this idea that you guys look at microorganisms and you're building products based on microorganisms rather than based on maybe these artificial or synthetic inputs long-term. But talk a little bit about what that means. Like, do you guys mind, like you literally have people shoveling dirt, or what does that really look like?
Yeah, so a little background. First off, if you go back to the 1950s, the old school with the guy with the really deep voice who would talk about the amazing science being done on the movie reels, you would see scientists mining soil specifically for antibiotics. All of our antibiotics came through what we call a process called biomining, where you look in an environmental sample. Penicillin was a fungus found on a orange peel. And until this pandemic, none of us knew that most of humanity died early because of microbial diseases, for those of us fortunate enough to live in the richer economies. Anyway, I digress. So what we're doing is we're taking that same idea and we're bringing the 21st century sequencing tools to the play. Dr. Goldman has developed a microbial discovery method where you specifically take teaspoons of soil as your mines, hundreds of them, and there's 1 million plus microbes in every teaspoon of soil. And then you look against a specific activity. So very simply killing mosquito larvae, eating plastics, you can go down the list. Anything you can imagine, it can be done. And you take that and you look for microbes that have that activity, but you look in populations. And there's a lot of science that goes into it, but at the end of the day, you use genetic sequencing to identify what's in the soil And one of the 10 guys that we found to kill mosquito larvae using the old methods never would have been found. There were 7 reeds out of 200,000 reeds in our soil mine where that came from that were with that organism. But because of the way we go about it, we were able to find that rare organism to tease out a new potential insecticidal microbe. And that really, bringing those new microbes into the R&D pipeline is desperately needed if we're to have a sustainable ag system.
Well, thanks, Charlie. So I want to move back to, and by the way, we have a question in our Q&A. If the panelists would take a look at your Q&A, an individual startup, and I think he'll have a chance to refer to Kay and her question here. But Stephanie, let's talk a little bit about how things actually get from this idea, like researchers have these ideas. How does a place like the Danforth and other places that may want to function in the role of like the Danforth in supporting these people, what are the technical resources that people need that they don't frequently have when they're a startup, if that makes sense?
Oh, goodness. So here's what, so first of all, I'm not a scientist. I'm a political scientist, which we all know is not a scientist. So I do not even personally have a true appreciation for this in my background, but in my career, what I have come to appreciate, and certainly in this job, is the real, even just the equipment, right? Even just the level of training it takes for some of these lab technicians to be able to effectively test some of these kinds of technologies we're talking about. So what does that look like? So a startup, I mean, let's think about this. You might have a scientist or two and a CEO, somebody who's out there trying to raise money. I mean, that's what this might look like. You absolutely do not have funding, more than likely, to buy all of this fancy high-tech lab equipment that you need. And so having access to a place like the Danforth Center, we're certainly not the only place on the planet, but I will say we are in some regards a place where some of the science that we do is the only place that it can be done. To give startups access to that technology, access to scientists who know how to operate it, access literally physically to those spaces where they can either learn from our scientists or do some of that testing themselves is invaluable, because they literally cannot buy the equipment to do it themselves. So, a lot of times we have startups that may move here just because they need access to our equipment and our scientists. They end up staying here because what they realize is that the ecosystem that we've built here and are trying to build, it has all the other pieces too, right? It has the physical buildings, it has the funding and investment structures. So people come here for all kinds of different reasons. I think a lot of these startups in our specific kind of arena come here for access to the core facilities that we have at the Danforth Center. We also, as a region, we have 1,000 plant scientists. I actually think the number may even be higher. We use 1,000 because it's this kind of like really fun round number. But the truth is we have the largest number of plant scientists anywhere in the world in one place. And so that in and of itself is extremely valuable to startups. So I think that's a long-winded way to answer your question, but it really cannot be overstated how important access to technology is to a startup.
Yeah. And I'd like to just echo what Stephanie said, because I have lived it. With Plastomics, the company would not have been successful without the collaboration with the Donald Danforth Plant Sciences Center. We talk about facilities, but when we started Plastomics back at the same time Charlie started Pluton, there were no laboratories available to set up a biotech company. And so the Danforth Center was, the leadership at the Danforth Center was gracious enough to give us a space in the building, and Plastomics is still in the building, and we're collaborating with at least a half a dozen scientists there. And it's been key to the success. And I think the IN2 program is also a really good example, and Charlie mentioned it, of how a public-private partnership with the Danforth Center has actually accelerated the ecosystem of startups here in St. Louis. The Wells Fargo Foundation is actually funding these collaborations like Pluton and Plastomics have been involved with. So it can't be overstated, Stephanie, how critical the Danforth Center is to plant biotech and agricultural startups here in St. Louis.
So I'm going to veer from some of the prepared questions we had. The question that Kay asked was about, she has some IP for a self-watering container for growing food in. And, I think that maybe if we each just took a little bit of time from each of our perspectives, we've got mechanical, she's got a manufactured product, and it's for growers, but as well, I was thinking about the plant, the Danforth, with what you guys have is the capabilities to really monitor in incredible detail the difference that inputs make in something, like to actually really be able to build an understanding to say, here's how much water this saves, here's how much yield this improves. Like, you guys have a way to actually quantify that. Charlie, with your entrepreneurial background, and Sharon with how you see big pictures. I would just, you guys have all seen Kay's question, but she said, how does she go from this idea and maybe a prototype to really springing this on the world? How could, give it just a couple of thoughts. We can't answer all of her questions here, and we can't we can't advise her completely, but just give some thoughts to kind of open her eyes to what are some of the potentials that she could use to bring this forward. Because I think this is a great example of the kind of people we all work with.
Yeah, I'll jump in. So Kay, so you've got a great idea. You're the two real concrete things you need to do are, you need to network, and there's down at the Cortex, the CIC, for about $200 a month, you can get co-working space when the pandemic ends. There's a lot of people down there that you can meet, and the Venture Cafe and things like that actually do provide nice opportunities for folks to meet like-minded people who want to start businesses and are looking for help. I think also getting a real world example, getting what they call an MVP, a minimum viable product. I see that Tyrean, you guys, getting it into one of Tyrian's farm and actually showing that it's getting some information out there, so that when you go to talk to people, you have something that you can already say, hey, this does work. And then finally, you're going to have to get, at some point, if it's protectable on a patent, you need to get a patent lawyer involved, but that costs money. Usually $5,000 to $10,000.
Fardis, I was wondering if you could talk, because you have a background as a mechanical engineer. So like, this is a product, this is really in your kind of wheelhouse. Can you talk a little bit about just really, like, this is not a consumer product that you're trying to make a widget to get, either Shark Tank to feature you on, or a buyer at QVC to, put you on the show. Can you talk a little bit about that process and how somebody can get from idea to real success more quickly?
Okay. More quickly. Okay.
I think she's looking for just a month. I don't think she wants to accelerate faster than a month. No, I'm just kidding. Like, like we know that it, more quickly is relative, but like, how would you counsel, what's a big piece of advice that you would give to say, so here's how to start. Here's the first step on that journey that's improves your likelihood of going someplace as you journey.
Okay. I think the most important thing that I would say is, how do you prove that what you're saying, it's a new technology? How do you prove that's working? So be ready to back your claim with data, because investors, they are doing their due diligence. So the most important thing to me is being able to back what you're claiming with repeatable, very clear data. So that's one thing. Another thing is finding a really good first adopters, I would say. That would be a really good jump if you can find a good first adopter that can promote you, that can you show it to your investors in your presentation. So these are the things I would say from the engineering point of view. Another thing is that I've learned in this business, your product's going to have a rough time. It's going to get water on it. It's going to get stepped on it. It's going to get dragged around in bad weather. So be prepared for that too. So that's another thing that I learned on the best way, which is the hard way.
I would like to just jump in here. So first of all, I would love to try to at least connect you with people who might know more at the Danforth Center. So please follow up with me after this call, because we are a nonprofit, so we're not in this to make money. And I always tell people I'm never the smartest person in the room, but I'm usually about 1 degree of separation from the people who are. And guaranteed there's people within the Danforth Center that have experience with something in this realm that might be able to connect you with some other scientists or partners or funders or those kinds of things. So I would be happy to help. And I think that is what, the Danforth Plant Science Center and others in this space, specifically in the nonprofit space, that's what we're trying to do here, is just make connections for people. So I'm happy to play that role.
So Tyrean, I want to go to you with this. I think you might have a little bit of familiarity with Kay, or at least you suggested that she attend this session. She mentioned in her answer, in her question, but so we're hearing that from everybody, you need to get this out. You need to actually demonstrate that it's working and everything. But let's really talk about the reality. One of the challenges is, if you have an app, you can demonstrate in an app how people use the app. If you're doing something growing, there's a growing cycle that you can't just, like prove in a weekend that this is actually having. So like, how would you work with somebody like this? And then, how open are growers to being able to work with innovators and people coming with new ideas? I think one of the challenges is, we see a little bit of solutionism where all of these startups were like, oh, I hacked this thing together in a weekend and I want to force it on a farm, get some grower to use it. Like, what's the reality of working with a grower to prove a concept?
I think we all are open for collaborating with people. It's just the point of I guess building a relationship. We have a history of not just pertaining to growing, just if someone come in and just you got to like get to know someone, so someone be open with you. So it's basically just getting it out there, communication. We all open with innovative ways. I'm interested in utilizing solar panels myself. I don't know how to do that and what way, but yeah, I'm open to that. And of course, improving the soil quality. We all open to things of that nature. Yeah, and it's just opportunity and just figuring out what's out there. For example, for me, I just figured out that a form number. I didn't know anything about a form number until someone told me about it. And I know I get that opened up funds with the USDA and things of that nature. So just getting the information to you, that's all. But we all are open to collaborate. And there's a lot of farmers besides me that's local and that's in the area as well.
Yeah, I'd like to just.
And I want to bring up. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, I saw Kay wanted to know who. Okay, I've got data, I've got a patent, I've got a product, and here I am sitting by myself. How do I get money? I mean, that is the key thing. There's two things that startups need. They need time and they need money. And so I would say that there is lots of opportunity to promote your product to different entities here in St. Louis, and not even just in St. Louis, but in the region. So there's some help, and I'd be happy to help you introduce you to people. There's people like Biogenerator who have economic development funding from the federal government to help promote companies like yours. There's the Yield Lab, there's angel groups. So there's lots of opportunity for you to promote that even within the region and get somebody to back you. So I'd be happy to help.
Yeah, I was, it kind of showed this. I think that I'm really glad Kay asked this question because we wanted to close in the last 10 minutes here to kind of talk about opportunities. So what are opportunities for startups and what can they work on? Because we've talked about established or going concerns, and we have other ones, lots of them here in town, but let's talk a little bit about what we see as opportunities to kind of open people's eyes. Like we were mentioning, this idea of reduced inputs, reduced use of land, bringing growing closer. I mean, that's like vertical farming, like, are there opportunities like that for startups? Charlie, and what you guys do you guys see opportunities for startups to help you guys as you grow, as you start identifying some of these things? What are the companies that you're going to need in your ecosystem in order to bring these things to market? Fardis, as you guys think about wearables and animal health and things, what are the things, but maybe just kind of like blue sky a little bit to kind of, whet people's appetites for what they could be working on. I don't know if anybody wants to start.
I can start about, so a lot of opportunities, I think it opens up when we have regulation. I've seen that in different businesses, that when you have regulations coming out, people have to adjust to that. And that brings up a lot of opportunities because it opens up, for example, I was doing some research in Australia. They are way ahead of us in traceability of the cattle and having a technology for cattle management because of the regulations. So how's the panel thinks about the future regulations coming up in the U.S. and how that can affect in the opening up good windows for technology?
I would just add, as a recovering communications person, never let a good crisis go to waste. The pandemic has exposed some weaknesses in our system. I do believe that the U.S. food system is strong and stable, and we survived this very well comparatively to certain other places, but it did expose some weaknesses. So I think it's interesting to think about traceability, as he just mentioned, but other issues along the food supply. I think that asking farmers what their pain points are and have been in the middle of this will be different than it was a year ago. I think local production that's been brought up here, especially in the livestock world, is going to be really important, but also on the crop side. We can no longer depend on our food that needs to come from hundreds, if not thousands of miles away if something like this happens again. So I actually think COVID presents some really interesting opportunities in the entrepreneur space for agriculture.
Yeah, I like to add to that too. This has been it's been a blessing in disguise, I guess, because the pandemic has increased my business this year, and just the response of just people pouring in, people wanting to help now, and it's like the veil been uncovered, So and just to touch on Kay, I don't know if she's been looking into accelerator programs, but that's what kind of helped me. When I started 2018, I had 12,000 square feet. Now I have 3 acres, which in that matter of time, that's because demand is there. But I've been involved in a lot of different accelerators and cohorts, like Balsa Foundation, We Power, and things of that nature. And those cohorts and accelerators have people in place that provide the resources and provide some funding and give you the toolage that you need to move forward. So it is those type of accelerators out here right now, and a lot of them that's starting up too as well.
And the accelerators that's where you get into groups that are trying to help startups go and help really matchmake investors to good startup ideas and help teach you how to present yourself. It's hard work, and you got to learn how to pitch, and I am still learning, and I made a lot of mistakes and I got a lot of no's, and you just got to do it. But at the end of the day, you want to keep trying. It's a sales game. It's a bit of a numbers game. You need to talk to lots of people. You need to be smart about who you talk to, and you need to be, if somebody you're working with isn't helping you advance your business down the road, you need to cut bait and find somebody else. Wasting too much time with somebody who's it happens, and you just have to be careful. That's all.
And talking about COVID and opening opportunity, we were able to get to an accelerator program in Philadelphia, which they open up because of COVID. They allow companies coming up from different regions, which they weren't doing that. So that gave us a big opportunity that we were successful there. So that's another part. Don't just focus on your region. There might be opportunities outside too.
Yeah,
That's a great point. You know, that this region has a lot of great opportunity. You know, like if you were doing something that's data oriented, our huge geospatial community might be really important. You know, somebody mentioned regulatory. Actually, we have a startup that does very well on tracking regulatory trends. That is called, they used to be called track bill, but, you know, like looking at what are, you know, to help you mine regulations for opportunities. But but you might also find that, you know, the first use case of yours is for a crop that isn't in our area, but that is really strong in another place that you might have a really great place to be because they really care about your product a lot. Tyrean, I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about you're a grower because you're trying to solve this desert food food apartheid kind of problem. Is that's a passion of yours? You know, are there opportunities for startups to be doing things to help growers directly interact with consumers? You know, do we need to have some kind of, you know, a CSA kind of app that helps that happen, or, you know, the Shopify for local growers? Are there opportunities for startups to solve your pain points?
Oh yeah, most definitely. CSAs that this is my first year doing CSAs because the demand was so high. So
I'm sorry, can for people that don't know, would you tell people briefly what a CSA is?
Yeah, it's a community supported agriculture. So basically it's a food subscription. Basically it's, farmers like this in particular, because you get paid up front, and then like every week they'll get a box or a crate size full of whatever you harvest or whatever you want to set it up to be. So that's what that is. So my first time, and I started pretty late. I started in July, first week of July, and I just ended the last week of October. So this is my first year doing that, and I only wanted 10 people and I got 30. So that was awesome. But yeah, I never even thought of that. But an app for CSAs would be awesome. My biggest thing was deliveries. So if we could fill up like a Uber type thing to do the deliveries with the food, I don't know, that'd be a good innovation. But anything, of course, any type of technology that'll help assist with that process would be lovely. Yeah.
So Charlie, that fits into your past role. I was just smiling because, you know, he's like, well, we need somebody that can do delivery. And Charlie just told us he, you know, exited a company, sold a company that was doing tens of thousands of local deliveries a day, you know? So can you think about ways that startups, you know, maybe can merge the logistics and the ag stuff that we're talking about?
Yeah, first off, you know, nobody ever wants to pay for delivery and everybody wants it to go flawlessly. So, you know, that's your first problem.
So now that we've done the doom and gloom, you know.
No, you have to include transportation in your costing. That's the deal. And you need to, there are a lot of still local courier services out there that can help be very flexible. Tyrean, happy to talk through your logistics needs and connect you to some folks. But at the end of the day, you need to get the delivery at a price point that meets your customers' reliability. And it's a scale issue. But there's a lot of transportation. There is really, at the end of the day, there is a niche for every, you just need to know how to look for it. There's a niche for every type of delivery in the world. There really is. There's a lot of transportation companies out there.
And we heard that, you know, these food miles, that this is enormous. So any opportunity to reduce that, to solve that logistic problem, make that more local, is an opportunity to disintermediate huge expenses.
Oh yeah, no, from my logistics background, I personally think one of the precision ag and the whole, I call it the hothouse because it can be greenhouse, vertical, anything indoor. I think growing high value crops in local areas is a trend that's here to stay. And I would not be surprised 10 to 15 years from now, we get all our berries. Everyone in an urban center gets their berries from within 100 miles of where they are. It just wouldn't surprise me.
Fardis, do you see any opportunities that, you know, because of your refrigeration, you know, like you've got a little bit of that actually cold storage, we could talk more about logistics, but you could also talk about wearables and kind of where you guys are at. You know, as you guys grow with calving technologies, you're producing actually algorithms that can live on hardware to, you know, do things to mitigate loss or to enhance value. Can you think of ways that startups can play in that and help you guys deliver what you're doing?
Sure. So as you mentioned, we are developing the prediction algorithm. So we could start partnering with the companies that already done the hardware, because we are not interested. So another way, opportunity is see if you can partner with a company that can bring up or can give you resources that you don't have or you don't want to spend time on it. So that's something I see could be a really good aspect to look at. So take advantage of what it's been done instead of reinventing the wheel.
And we're almost out of time, so I just want to close Stephanie and Sharon. Stephanie, I'd like you to go first. So you got all these researchers that are doing really interesting things and have these capabilities. Do you see areas that you think startups can partner either with the researchers or do you see collaboration opportunities for that are helping? And then Sharon, I'd like to just kind of get some closing thoughts from you as well, from kind of a big picture.
So one of the things that just came up for me, and to be honest, I think that our industry needs to address this, right? Ag tech does not have to be a phone app. It does not have to live in the cloud. It does not have to be some fancy thing. Right now, Tyrean is telling us that he needs logistics, good old driving around, delivering on time goods and services. There are plenty of startup opportunities in the space outside of what I think typical people think of ag tech. It doesn't have to be really fancy. And with this whole idea of local production on the other side of COVID, this transportation thing is real. There's probably higher demand for it today than there was a year ago. So anyway, I guess I would just like to make the point that yes, there are all kinds of fancy, sexy technologies coming out of the scientists at the Danforth Center in startups around the world. But we also are going to have to get back to the basics a little bit in the way that we think about some of this stuff to deliver this technology to people. So I think that once again, agriculture is a great landing spot for all kinds of different people.
Thanks for that, Stephanie. And Sharon, so because you've done some stuff with some startups, but you do some kind of industry convening kinds of things in ag tech. You've done some things with the Ag Innovation Showcase. So, are we talking about that these things are really local problems, or are these really global problems? And can people that are listening to this really play an impact globally? And is that really realistic?
Oh, I think that it is global problems. And I think people locally can make an impact. I think what Charlie's doing can make an impact in Europe. People need, Europe needs to adapt more sustainable chemistries to use and stuff to use, in their production. So definitely, I think a startup is going to start up locally. Okay, so look at a company like Amazon. It changed our life and the way that we do things. And it was a little startup in Seattle. So I just want to make that as an example. Benson Hill could be a company like that. They can make an impact globally on the type of food that is created.
And go from this closet to this global impact.
And I think there's so many stories like that. And I think the entrepreneurial community here in St. Louis can make a global impact. And I think this is a great place to start it. So for all the entrepreneurs out there, I just want to encourage you to keep trying. And there's a support system here for you.
So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up with that. Thank you all to our roundtable folks, Tyrean and Charlie and Fardis and Stephanie and Sharon. This has been a great conversation. I think that what's amazing is we've talked about all of these opportunities, and most of us know of dozens of other things going on that are in this space that we just didn't talk about today. There's a lot of energy and a lot of opportunity that requires figuring out how to get out there and add value, and just a really tremendously motivating story. And also talking about how that this can make a difference, and this doesn't have to be predatory, that we have to do this for the benefit of everybody as well. And I think that's a really great story. You guys are awesome. We're going to go ahead and end this now. There will be a recording posted, and there will be a follow-up story, but I encourage everybody listening. Thank you so much, Kay. We can't wait to hear about your success, and everybody else, we can't wait to hear what today's conversation helped you decide to do.